Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. This is our second episode of the week. In case you missed our first, go back, check it out. It dropped on Tuesday. We had Tyler Calvaruso on to break down a couple of big Penn State commitments that have occurred in the last week, including a Philadelphia standout, a top 24/7 wide receiver out of Virginia. And if you missed our episode that dropped last Friday, just want to point your attention in that direction because it was a really insightful conversation with one of our North Carolina analysts in the 24/7 Sports Network. I think we all learned a lot more about linebacker Amari Campbell, what he's going to bring to the Nittany Lions in 2025 from that segment. So check those out. Just some recent content you may have missed along the way here in May. A lot planned for you in this episode. We're going to bring back on board Tyler Calvaruso and focus in on 13 players who are set to join the Penn State roster between now and preseason camp. 2 transfers who we've talked about quite a bit. And we'll also turn our attention toward 11 remaining freshmen, the next wave of that 2025 class set to be on campus in the coming months, potentially impacting plans on the field come fall. We'll focus on a few of those freshmen in particular with Tyler, and then we'll close out this episode with some intel from Ohio State. Of course, Oregon ended up winning the Big Ten championship last year and their debut with the conference, but it was Ohio State that sat atop the college football universe when the national championship game ended. And so we're going to catch up with Patrick Murphy, who does a fantastic job covering the Buckeyes within our 24/7 sports community, and hear about what are the top storylines in Columbus right now. What are they dealing with from an issue standpoint? What looks like to be a successful piece of the puzzle for them? And how is the fallout shaping up from Jim Knowles departing and becoming Penn State's defensive coordinator? A lot to get into with Patrick a little bit later. But first things first, as I promised, Tyler Calvaruso back on the Lions 24/7 podcast. And Tyler, we spent a lot of time discussing the future. The 2026 class has been in our spotlight for a while. We're going to finish with another note on that class with you here in a bit. But the 2025 class was in our wheelhouse this time last year. Much of them have arrived on campus in the form of January enrollment. We got our heads wrapped around them a little bit through 15 spring practice periods, winter conditioning. We're going to get kind of a fresh start here for 11 more of those freshman players, and we're going to work our way through that group. But this is the conclusion, I guess you could say, of a years-long process where Penn State tried to find the best group of players they could get in this 25 class. There were some misses. There were some losses along the way, but they got to the finish line with 27 signees last December. They've had a long look at several of them, and here you go. It's going to be a key building block for whatever comes next for this Nittany Lions team beyond 2025.
It's definitely another foundational class, and that's the goal every single cycle for James Franklin and his staff, right? You want to stack quality class on top of quality class, and I think that's what Penn State has done with its 2025 recruiting efforts. I mean, some of the early returns on the guys who are already in town and on campus and the guys who went through spring practice, they've been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, just yesterday, Kobe Howard posted some of his spring practice clips on social media, and spring practice clips are what they are when it comes to the offseason hype machine. But, I mean, it's hard to look at a clip like that and miss the traits that Penn State likes so much coming out of high school. I'm just using Howard as an example because the internal optimism surrounding this group and some of the things that have been said, there's some pretty high opinions on the guy in the building, guys who arrived as early enrollees. And those opinions, they remain intact for the guys who are going to arrive here pretty soon, late in the spring and summer as well. So there's a lot of excitement surrounding this group. You've already got a bunch of your talent on board. You're going to get more of it in town soon. And there's just an overall really positive feeling surrounding what this haul can accomplish and what it can mean for James Franklin's program moving forward.
I put together a story over at Lions247.com a few days breaking down 10 new Penn State players who impressed during spring practices based on the feedback that we have gathered. 8 of them that we listed were from that freshman class. And I'm probably leaning towards this group being more impactful this autumn than the last couple of freshman classes. We know what the 2022 class did during that Rose Bowl run. They have really been at the crux of what Penn State has accomplished the last couple of seasons, raising the profile of this program a bit. But that 23 class, the 24 class, there was far and few between in speaking about guys who were on the field from September through December and as key pieces of the puzzle. So I think that maybe changes a little bit. I don't know if you're going to get 4 or 5 starters year one from that group, but I do think you're going to see the 2 deep impacted along the way. We'll talk about that freshman group and what else is coming in just a moment with you, Tyler, but let's circle back to the 2 remaining transfer portal additions who are set to join this squad. We got a long look at 6 transfer pickups who came to campus in the winter. Naturally, a lot of attention was was on those two wide receivers, Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson. But Pena's going to have a lot of attention on himself. I saw 24/7 Sports already listed Drew Aller and Trevor Pena as one of the top 10 wide receiver quarterback duos in college football. I think that's that's great based on what they've accomplished respectively on different campuses. Pena 80 plus catches last year, 10 plus total touchdowns last year. Aller, building off what he did in year 2, year 3 with the program. But Tyler, we got to see it all come together. And so Trevor Pena getting to campus, having that month of preseason work and then some non-conference action to try to get on the same page with his new quarterback and become a go-to guy for a different offensive attack. And then the other guy who's coming to campus, who we discussed in detail a couple episodes ago, Amari Campbell, starting experience at North Carolina, really effective pass rusher. He's the guy who was calling plays for them, wearing the green dot on his helmet, also an emotional, passionate leader among his peers based on what we heard. So, Tyler, you put those two together, you stack them on top of what we've already witnessed from Penn State in 2025, and it just further emphasizes that Penn State intends to play 17 games this year.
Yeah, you go out and add guys like this during the spring portal window. You know you're gearing up for a national title run. You need these kinds of pieces in place to compete for a national title. Let's just start with Pena. I mean, all eyes are going to be on him the second that he gets going with Drew Aller. That just comes with the territory of being the top wideout to hit the spring portal window and land at Penn State. I mean, he's got 1 year. He's got 1 year to make an impact in state college, 1 year to contribute to a potential national title run, and 1 year to be a top target for Drew Aller. So all eyes are going to be on him. There's a little bit less pressure on Amari Campbell as a guy with multiple years of eligibility remaining, a guy who could, get his feet wet a little bit in year 1 and then really excel in year 2. But he could easily excel in year 1 as well. We've seen it on tape and what he produced at North Carolina. He's a smart kid. He's a good football player. So 2 high-quality spring portal window additions, and they're going to be counted on in some capacity in 2025, especially Pena. I mean, he's going to be a focal point, working out of the slot, working underneath, serving as that security blanket of sorts for Drew Aller, given who he is as an underneath route runner and the work that he did out of the slot for Syracuse in 2024. The production spoke for itself. He got it done in the ACC. Now he has to bring it over to the Big Ten. Same deal with Campbell. Got it done against ACC offenses. Now he's got to do the same thing against Big Ten offenses. I think both of these guys are capable of replicating what they accomplished at their previous stops. I think both these guys are fits on and off the field. That's why Penn State brought them in, of course. I mean, we always say it. They're not going to reach on a guy who doesn't work with what they're trying to accomplish scheme-wise and in the locker room as well. They're not going to bring in guys who don't work towards that one common goal, and that's bringing a national title back to State College. So skill set-wise, what they bring from an intangible standpoint, I think Penn State did really, really well during this spring portal window, and there's a lot of excitement about what these guys are going to bring to the table when they arrive on campus.
It'll be fun to follow how quickly they can get acclimated and then get moving forward and pushing Penn State towards those national championship goals. We have talked a lot about both Campbell and Pena. We had a Syracuse insider with us here on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, spent about 20 minutes breaking down Pena's Syracuse career and then moving it forward to what he might be able to accomplish here at Penn State. I think some guys that we probably haven't discussed nearly as much here on the podcast are those remaining freshmen. I mentioned 16 freshmen got to town during the winter. Many of them actually got to town during Penn State's playoff run and were able to get practices logged during the Fiesta Bowl preparation, during the Orange Bowl preparation. So on paper, this may be ahead of the curve freshman class because of that experience, but these guys are still waiting for their first college football practice. And with 11 of them, Tyler, we decided to take a different angle here, come up with a few different factors that we're looking for within this freshman class and kind of applying some labels. And the first one's easy because it's not subjective. We are wondering who is the number 1 ranked player in this class. Well, it's Malachi Goodman, number 1 player in the state of New Jersey, the number 5 offensive tackle. He's out of Paramus Catholic, and he is the number 19 overall recruit in 24/7 Sports 2025 rankings. Goodman was a big fish to land, and he actually got elevated to 5-star status, if I recall correctly, after he was committed to Penn State. And so, Tyler, we've discussed offensive line depth quite a bit here and what Phil Troutwine has been able to accomplish. He picked up a 5-star offensive tackle prospect in Javen Williams a couple cycles ago. Tell us about Goodman and what his road to this point looked like and what he may be able to accomplish early on campus.
First things first with Goodman, when it comes to what he can potentially accomplish right off the bat, I mean, he's had himself a hell of an offseason. He's been locked in. He has transformed his body. He's slimmed down a little bit, shed some of the bad weight, packed on some more muscle, did all of that knowing, hey, look, I'm going to be hitting the ground running in the summer. I'm going to be thrust right into it. He's going to dive into that offseason program with Chuck Losey, and he's going to get his body right. So I think he's already mentally and physically, he's heading in the right direction because he's been pretty focused and he's just locked in, man. That's been the feedback I've gathered. Everyone I've talked to about Malachi Goodman has been really excited about his headspace ahead of his arrival on campus. He's just put in a lot of the work necessary to be a contributor as early as possible. Does that happen year one? A lot of that has to do with, depth, injuries, offensive line. It's tough, man. You got bodies dropping left and right during the year, and it's a tough place to play right off the bat. It's difficult to acclimate to life in the trenches in the Big Ten right away. Especially Malachi Goodman played great competition in North Jersey, but that doesn't compare to what he's going to see in college, not in the slightest. And he dominated that North Jersey competition. Really athletic kid, strong, good footwork, sound mechanically, got better and better as his prep career went on. He's a quiet kid. He's really focused on what he has to do with the task at hand, keeps to himself. He's not going to be one of those guys out and about. He's locked in on what he's doing. And he's just, everyone I've talked to outside of Penn State as well, they think that he has a very bright collegiate future ahead of him. And our team at 24/7 Sports, it was impossible for them to ignore the upside there. 5-star status, they think he could be an early draft pick. And I can't argue with that because I got the chance to see Goodman during his prep career, and he was dominant. And I think there's a very good chance that he remains a high-level contributor at the next level.
Yeah, quick anecdote to top what you just said as well. We saw Malachi Goodman on the practice field this spring. Obviously, just as an observer, he's visiting campus, getting face-to-face with his future coaches and teammates. But if he had traded his street clothes for a uniform and put on a helmet, you could have fooled me and said he was a redshirt junior. I mean, he is really physically where you're looking for. And I think you brought it up good. He may not be very different in his weight. What was he, about 320 pounds when he signed with them?
It's a body composition deal. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and we've seen that before. You may stand on the scale and be the exact same weight 5 months later, but he looks different. There's less sloppiness to it. It's tightened up, and that's exactly what you want to see, especially for a guy who wasn't able to be part of the winter conditioning, the spring practices. And so you want to set yourself up physically as best you can because mentally, what do they say, drinking out of a fire hose. That's what it's like for freshmen out there on the field. And I'll just note there are 6 total 4-star prospects from the remaining freshmen who are coming to campus. Jeff Exeter Jr., a wide receiver out of the McDonough School in Maryland, which has been a great pipeline at Penn State. He is the other top 24/7 prospect along with Goodman, making the move to campus. And Tyler, another category we wanted to focus in on here was biggest recruiting win. It can feel a little bit murky now because these recruiting battles are well in the rearview mirror. We're focused in on what's going on in 2026 and all those contests. But when it comes to a guy that's going to be making his move this summer that maybe you didn't know all the way it was going to be Penn State picking up that commitment and ultimately his signature, who stands out to you?
Easy one, man. Chaz Coleman fighting off Ohio State late in the cycle. That was a huge recruiting win for James Franklin, Deion Barnes, and the Penn State staff. We got to be honest. I think it would have gotten very, very interesting if Ohio State offered a little bit earlier. I think if Ohio State had put a little bit more time and effort into building that relationship with Chaz Coleman earlier, I think it would have gotten very, very interesting down the stretch. But when Coleman reflected on everything and reflected on why he committed to Penn State in the first place, he didn't commit to the Nittany Lions and, just, all right, I got my spot now. If Ohio State comes, I'll make my move now. That was never the thought process. He built a really, really strong relationship, a trusting relationship with Deion Barnes throughout his recruitment. There was a wave of Power 4 programs getting in on Coleman throughout the fall. He was a very, very late riser in the 25 class. Penn State was earlier than most, and I think that paid dividends in the end. Again, I mentioned the time Ohio State had to build that relationship and that playing a factor, I believe. Well, Penn State, they were there from the start. They were building that relationship over an extended period of time. There's a lot of trust built up, and when Coleman made it to State College for the whiteout against Washington in November, he knew it was time to go. Ohio State came calling a couple of weeks later. It looked like he was going to make it out there for an official visit. And this is where the staff deserves, I think, the most credit in this entire ordeal. If Coleman was going to be making it out there for an official, it seemed like that was all set. And then the Penn State staff jumps in, Deion Barnes, Franklin, the whole 9 yards. It was a group effort. And they don't just shut down that Ohio State official visit. They get Coleman back to campus for the regular season finale against Maryland. So they didn't just keep him home. They got him back to town and really just sold why Penn State is the right place. It was all good from that point on. And I think this is just one of the biggest recruiting wins of the cycle. Not just because you're beating out Ohio State either. I think when you look at ceiling in this class, Chaz Coleman, he's that guy. There are people who think he has really early round draft potential once he puts it all together working with Deion Barnes.
Yeah, I think he'll be competing probably around 6'5", 230 as a freshman, maybe in that range. But he's a guy that, check back in next spring. And if he was here in January, what might he look like going into preseason camp? Everybody has their own journey here, and he's certainly one to follow. And when you pry a guy out of Ohio like they did, extra spotlight on that young man, Chaz Coleman, adding to his stable of edge rushers, young edge rushers that Penn State's going to be looking to develop under Deion Barnes. He out of Warren, Ohio, by the way. And one other name I wanted to bring up is Cam Smith, who initially committed to Duke, and former defensive coordinator Manny Diaz down there. He ends up changing plans, signing with Penn State. He'll join Dan Connor's linebacker room as the third freshman linebacker this summer. And he comes out of that St. Joe's prep program in Philadelphia that we talked about earlier this week, landing Alex Haskell from there as a defensive lineman, trying to stack commitments on an annual basis from a powerhouse Philadelphia squad there at St. Joe's prep. Tyler, the next category, best chance to make an early impact. And let's be honest, anytime you're getting to campus in the summer versus the winter, you're behind the process a bit. And it can be a bit more of an uphill battle. But guys like Abdul Carter have done it before. There's not many guys like Abdul Carter, but when you look through these 11 freshmen, who stands out to you as someone who could get to campus, hit the ground running, and be a factor on game days come the fall?
For me, it's Jameer Joseph, and there's a couple of different reasons for that. One, we've seen Terry Smith be very liberal with his cornerback use. If you're a young guy in that cornerback room and you come in and you show you can play, he has not been scared to burn through red shirts. He has not been scared to give guys opportunities. Could Jameer Joseph fall into that category? Wouldn't stun me, even though he's getting on campus a little bit later than everyone else. He's battle-tested. When we talk about the competition Malachi Goodman played in North Jersey, Jameer Joseph played that same competition, but he also went up against some really, really good wide receivers. I mean, he had a really good game against Quincy Porter, who was a five-star wideout signed with Ohio State, was a top Penn State flip target for a long time. Joseph more than held his own there. So he's battle-tested. He knows what it's like to go up against high-end receivers. Again, it's not the same as what you're going to see in North Jersey on a weekly basis, but he's familiar with the skill level, and he has won plenty of reps against high-level competition at the wide receiver position. So that's really encouraging. I think
Tyler, can I say something real quick? Just to further validate what you just said, you've brought up that matchup against Porter a few different times, and as a New Jersey native yourself, I'd understand why you want to go back to some strong New Jersey football competition. But in speaking to people inside Penn State facilities, I've heard multiple people say essentially when it comes to Jameer Joseph, just turn on that film and you'll figure it all out. And I think it proved a lot to them in that building. And I think you're right. They feel like he's a guy that they don't have to figure out a lot of things from a competitive standpoint with when he gets to campus. That's not always the case. They think he can show up and be ready to press these receivers and be ready to kind of hold his own in a college environment.
Yeah, no, the thing with Jameer Joseph is you see it on tape and it's off the field thing that's popped up. He has that mentality of, I don't care how much experience you have on me. I don't care how much size you have on me. I don't care how much strength you have on me. I'm going to give you my best every single rep. You're going to have that dog type mentality, and that has worked for him throughout his prep career because he's feisty, man. He's physical when he has to be physical. He's smart in coverage with his hands when he has to be smart in coverage with his hands. He's good in zone. He has essentially, we say it, and he's good against the run. He's kind of everything Terry Smith looks for out of his cornerback recruits. He has that mentality, and he has the physical traits, and it shows on film. And you see it on the basketball court as well. He's just as fierce of a competitor there. And, I mean, you always love to see stuff like that. Not just the athletic background that comes with having a multi-sport profile, but just the competitiveness. It flows throughout Jameer Joseph. And, again, I think when he gets to town, he's going to be ready to roll. There's not going to be some that high-level mental adjustment that some of the guys go through. I think he has the right mentality coming in, and that's why he's my pick for this category. I don't think anything is going to phase Jameer Joseph when he arrives on campus, not in the slightest.
Penn State lost a couple key cornerbacks during the offseason. Jalen Kimber, now an NFL rookie, Cam Miller, finishing his college career at Rutgers. And then you throw in that Don Mitchell, a redshirt freshman, hit the transfer portal during spring camp. And you're left with opportunities for young players. And we have a sense that Darius Dixon, the cornerback who showed up in January, is on a path toward green light and getting a chance to burn that red shirt. And we'll see if another cornerback can do that in Joseph. Next category here is we have two left. Highest ceiling, and let's face it, everybody's got a high ceiling, right? All 11 of them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be coming to Penn State. But who particularly do you lean toward on this one?
Removing Coleman from the equation, as we already touched on him, it's got to be Matt Henderson, really talented tight end out of Virginia, still coming into his own at the position. I mean, his senior year was his first time playing tight end full time. He was a wide receiver for most of his prep career. Again, he's got that multi-sport basketball background, so the athleticism speaks for itself in that regard. He's still making strides as a full-time tight end. He's still learning the blocking aspect of it. That's something we saw him working with Ty Howell during camp season. He's putting in a lot of work to become an overall tight end, not just a pass catching tight end, but Penn State loves the athleticism. They love the upside as a skill, really just a threat, as a skill threat. I mean, his route tree is impressive for a guy who's still learning the position. His hands are good. He knows how to high point the ball downfield. He can be a potential matchup problem at the next level. And as he comes into his own, I think that's going to be another Penn State tight end. We look back on it a few years from now, we see where he is now compared to where he is 2-3 years down the road in his development. We're saying, wow, Ty Howell did it again.
As we've seen repeatedly, he's going to show up on campus probably like 25, 30 pounds behind a lot of those other contemporaries in the tight end room. And considering what they have in that room right now, including the blue chip talent they've accrued, I think Matt Henderson, we can probably safely say, is more of a 2026 topic of conversation when it comes to game days, but a guy that we're curious to see how it develops along the way behind the scenes. Last one here for you. Actually, can I throw an name at you for high ceiling? Because Josh Johnson stands out to me.
Yeah,
he's got position flexibility. Committed to Louisville in the process. Ultimately, it was a pretty big flip for Penn State out of Ohio. And I just think they love this young man's physicality. They feel like he has a very high IQ. And he came to campus, really put together some strong testing numbers. And he's one of the more rangier, physically long defensive backs that they've brought in recent years. So I just want to throw his name out there as a high ceiling guy to monitor. Whether he surfaces at safety or cornerback ultimately remains to be seen. Let's go with the last one here, and I phrased it as wild card member of this 11-man freshman group that's going to get to campus in the summer. Who is the wild card?
I think when I evaluated this, it's Brady O'Hara, because you just don't really know exactly what you're going to get. He's going from tight end to playing O-line full time. The fact of the matter is, he either takes to it in his development or he doesn't. He's going to work his butt off to get to that point. That's one thing we've seen out of Brady O'Hara on the camp circuit. He's very coachable. He takes the coaching well. We saw him gradually improve throughout camp season, really in live time too during some of these camps. He would get better as camps would go on. But fact of the matter is, once the pads go on, he either picks it up and runs with it or it goes a different direction. There's going to be a lot of work that has to be put in. I think everyone's pretty aware of that. He's going to have to become more advanced physically as well. Again, I think that's something else that everyone is aware of. So we'll see where things are at a year or two from now, because I think this is more of a long-term project. But again, Brady O'Hara is another guy who's coming in with the right mindset. He's not going to be outworked, and I think that could take him places in his development. But it's very much a wait-and-see kind of deal, and I think that makes him the definition of a wild card.
I'm with you. I think he's the obvious answer there. And he put in the work last summer, but it's going to get really real in a hurry when he gets to campus and shows up in that offensive line room. And there's a whole set of responsibilities for him. I also was intrigued a little bit about Jabri Wallace-Coleman in this category as well. He's someone who popped up really early in his high school career at a big time program in Philadelphia, committed to the Georgia Bulldogs for a while when they were the reigning national champions, ends up in Penn State's class. But there's 4 guys competing for opportunities behind Nick Singleton and Katron Allen who've been putting in spring practice work, who've been around the program, and he's going to get to campus behind that. It's a position where it feels like the clock ticks for guys a lot when it comes to the transfer portal. So I want to see what Jabri Wallace-Coleman can accomplish here in year one in terms of self-confidence and what he can prove to Stan Drayton, Andy Kotelnicki, and the coaching staff. Because beyond Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, all bets are off on what this running back group is going to look like come spring ball 2026. And I'm very curious if Wallace-Coleman can assert himself as a contender there. Tyler, really appreciate the perspective on this class. You've done a great job tracking all of their recruitments going back early in their high school careers. One final recruiting note we wanted to get to here before we turn the page and focus on some Ohio State intel coming out of their spring practices. We got a new 5-star to examine in Pennsylvania rankings. He's the #1 player in the state of Pennsylvania. He has been for a while. Joey O'Brien. He was the topic of conversation for you and I on the last episode of this podcast. We brought up how he has two-way position versatility where Penn State could see him as a safety, as a wide receiver, perhaps both. And he's officially visiting the Nittany Lions this weekend. So nice timing for 24/7 Sports to elevate him to 5-star status. What do you make of this elevation, and what do we need to know, if you didn't mention it earlier in the week, about how much this weekend might matter for the Nittany Lions?
Not surprised. I think a lot of us saw this coming. I haven't had the pleasure of watching Joe O'Brien play in person. There was prep career. I think I'm going to change that this fall. But I mean, you put on the tape and he has that wow factor. I mean, really on both sides of the ball, wide receiver and safety. He has the makings of a high level college player, one who goes on to play for a long time in the NFL. I mean, the athletic markers check out. Everything he does just kind of checks out. It's rare you say that out of a high school prospect, because usually some of these guys, they still have a ways to go in certain areas. And Joey O'Brien does as well. He's far from a finished product. But you throw on that tape, man, he's really, really advanced skill set wise, what's between the ears. He's ahead of a lot of the guys in this class in that regard. So it's great. You know, Penn State's going to continue fighting just as hard as they were beforehand, because they've never cared about Joey O'Brien's ranking. They've loved him from the start when he was an unranked prospect. Because when they offered back last spring, it did not take long for him to become a top safety target and one of the top overall targets in this class. Sometimes you just know, and when it comes to Joey O'Brien, the Penn State staff knew. And now he's got a 5-star. I think that 5th star is very, very well deserved. So congrats to him, and he's got a pretty big official visit season coming up. So it's going to be interesting to see where he takes things in the end.
7 in-state players committed for Penn State out of the state of Pennsylvania. So we'll see. It would be a heck of a cherry on top. Not that he'd be the last piece, but a big-time long-term talent getting recognized at a national level. Tyler, we appreciate it. We know if anything pops this official visit weekend, and certainly there will be plenty of intel to discuss. You can find it over at lions247.com. We'll circle back with you on a podcast next week, too, to talk about some of the takeaways from the weekend that was. We'll be back on the camp circuit as well. Elite 11 camp coming here to State College conveniently for all of us. Tyler Calvaruso, Mark Brennan, Daniel Gallen, and myself will all be there watching these quarterbacks work. We are expecting both Penn State QB commits to be in attendance. So catch our coverage. That'll be on Sunday. So don't wait until next week and our next podcast. A lot of commentary, video highlights will be up at lions247.com. In the meantime, I'll let you get back to work, Tyler. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
As promised, we're going to turn our attention toward Columbus right now, where things really seemed to fizzle at the end of last regular season. It was not looking like a strong playoff push was ahead for the Ohio State Buckeyes when they fell to the Michigan Wolverines yet again, but we know how things ended up. They raised the trophy. They ultimately prevailed, and now Penn State's got to deal with them yet again. November 1st marks another trip out to Ohio State for the Nittany Lions. It's one that will be circled all the way through, no matter how well Penn State does through September and October. And when we want the freshest intel on Ohio State, you've learned it on the podcast, we go to our friend Patrick Murphy, resident insider of the Ohio State Buckeyes in our 24/7 Sports Network. Happy to have you with us once again, Patrick. What's going on?
Not much, Tyler. How are you?
Doing great over here. We're kind of catching our breath after spring ball and after the transfer portal madness. I think you know how that goes. I think we're safely maybe beyond the point where rosters are being reconstructed and we can step away from our phones for hours at a time now. But like you, we're just kind of waiting to see what it looks like when the curtain opens in August. We get the team completely on the field. And unlike you, there's a repeat for a championship that's in place for in Columbus. So I know you got a lot going on, so thank you for the time.
Absolutely. I'm always willing to chat with you.
Thank you. Likewise, I'll go on your show as well. I want to start here. Defining themes of this post-championship offseason for Ohio State. We'll get into some of the bumpier moments maybe for this offseason, but overall, as things stand in mid-May, what have been some of those key storylines that you have really taken note of?
Well, I think the first thing is the obvious one, and that's how do you repeat? And I think that's the question every defending national champion, every defending champion, any sport has to figure out. And it's probably the hardest thing to do in sports. Like once you get there and you've climbed to the mountaintop, you've achieved what you set out to do, now you got to start all over again. And I think Ohio State's taken a pretty good approach. Now, some of that is kind of built in because they lost so many guys that were a key part of that championship team in terms of on field each Saturday. It's going to look really different when the Buckeyes take the field in the fall. I think it was 14 starters and 17 key contributors that left the program. 14 of those guys got drafted last month. So it's going to look different. And that's kind of been a positive, I think, for Ohio State. Ryan Day talked early in spring ball about how some of the guys who are stepping into bigger roles and leadership roles asked to take down some of the championship stuff that's around the facility just because they didn't feel like they were the guys that won that. There's still banners and there's still stuff out on the practice field and whatnot, but they just felt like, hey, let's treat this like another year. Let's not go into this as, hey, we won something last year. Because a lot of these guys really didn't. Either they were on the sidelines watching most of those games, or they were recruits, transfers, whatever, watching from home. So they've taken that approach. It'll be interesting to see how that works. I don't think there is one right way to be a defending champion and try and repeat. But that's been a big thing this offseason. Obviously, replacing all of the guys that departed, and I know we'll get into some of that, and just, kind of building it all back up. And I think that is, again, one of the toughest things to do in sports. And, we'll see how they do it. Ryan Day's never been through this before. This is obviously his first national championship. Some of these coaches have had championships at various levels. Matt Patricia, who I know we're going to talk about, obviously, with the New England Patriots. But it's going to be an interesting case study here to see how the Buckeyes handle this, not only this offseason, but once we get into the season and in the fall.
Well, Ryan Day was presented a hurdle before he even showed up to the championship parade, right? The fact that Jim Knowles was obviously at that point weighing opportunities to go elsewhere after a national championship run as Ohio State's defensive coordinator. He put in a lot of work building the Buckeyes up on that side of the ball, and it certainly showed up when it mattered most. Knowles ultimately makes the move to Happy Valley, $3 million plus per year annually. He's the highest paid coordinator in college football. There's a ton of excitement. We've gotten feedback from position coaches to James Franklin to the players this spring. They're buying in, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, and everybody's on board with Jim Knowles. Meanwhile, in Columbus, how has the fallout gone? There's been some public commentary from Jim Knowles, who did an interview recently. I know Ryan Day had his own interview where he addressed Knowles' exit and how he felt about it a bit. Reading between the lines from both of those and knowing what you know on the ground in Columbus, what exactly is the fallout? Is there any extra motivation in the building about going up against him when he takes them on as Penn State's defensive coordinator? And we'll get to Matt Patricia after all that.
First, I want to say I think Penn State fans should be excited. Jim Knowles is great at what he does. I think we've talked before, Tyler, like sometimes it takes a little bit, which I know Penn State fans won't want to hear because I know what a big year this is in State College. But what he was able to do at Ohio State over his 3 seasons, and you saw it really take effect towards the end of that first season. I'm really interested to see how it works at Penn State. Obviously, different personnel, working with different coaches, but I think Penn State fans should certainly be excited about Jim Knowles coming in. From the Ohio State side of things, I think publicly they have tried to stay away from any sort of animosity or anything like that. And I think even privately, there's an understanding of this as a business, right? And while I don't know if Ryan Day was entirely thrilled with Jim Knowles asking for a contract extension during a college football playoff run, and obviously as they're pushing for the national championship, I do think he gets that, okay, other programs were interested. You have to make a decision at some point, right? So I think there's the feelings are mixed, but I would say for the most part, I think it is understood why it happened this way. And I think Ohio State, you understand that you can go out and get the next guy or whatnot. So in terms of motivation, I think once we get to that week, that will become a major topic. But a lot of these guys, as I mentioned, they weren't big parts of Jim Knowles' defense last season. Ohio State lost all 4 starting defensive linemen, one of their starting linebackers, 1 cornerback, 1 safety, and the nickelback. So while these guys worked with Jim Knowles, it wasn't like they're bringing back this whole defense that was under him. I think Ohio State knew one way or the other this defense was not going to be as good as arguably the best defense in the country last year, especially the second half of the season, just because of the turnover that was going to happen. So I don't get the sense that it is a lot of negative feelings towards Jim Knowles. I think that, like any time you play a former teammate, former coach, whatever it may be, come that game next year, maybe that's a little bit of it, but I think that game has enough juice in and of itself. And I imagine both teams are going to be pretty good again next season. So I think there will be enough motivation there. But I don't think it ended up being this big dramatic situation. I just think, both sides recognized the way that they were going to handle it. And, I think ultimately it probably worked out best for both Penn State and Ohio State.
Let's talk about his replacement, Matt Patricia. It doesn't seem that long ago where he was the youngish Bill Belichick disciple, rising his way up. Like many of those past Belichick disciples, he flamed out on his own, became the head coach for the Detroit Lions. It did not work out well for him. And my question really here, he circled back to the New England Patriots after his tenure with the Detroit Lions. I know he spent a season with the Eagles. It was a season when they had particularly problematic defensive issues, but the success outside of the bubble with Bill Belichick, am I missing it? And how much is that maybe weighing on the minds of Buckeyes fans that is this a dude who can show up somewhere else without Bill and get it done at a high level after you just won a national championship with Jim Knowles?
Yeah, I put my pencil in my ear to
thank you
to give a Matt Patricia feel here. I think that's the biggest question that we asked, and we're still sort of waiting to see for Matt Patricia, because as you mentioned, the success largely came when he was working under Bill Belichick, who, as we all know, despite some of the recent drama, is one of the best head coaches in the NFL history, and specifically on the defensive side. That's his baby, right? I think as we look into it more, having talked to Matt Patricia, having talked to the guys, like, you see why he was so successful. The guy was a rocket scientist before he became a defensive coordinator, before he got into football at all. Like, the smarts, unquestioned, similar to Jim Knowles. Like, when you talk to him, you just know you're talking to a guy who knows football, but also knows stuff outside of that on a very high level. So I've been impressed so far this, through spring. We got to go to Ohio State's coaches clinic that they hold every year, and they break all the coaches out at the end, and high school coaches can go sit at whichever coach they want. And there's whiteboards and stuff. And I went and sat at Matt Patricia's little area, and just the way he breaks things down, you can tell that he understands that not everybody is going to get it like an NFL veteran, right? So he talks about things in a sophisticated way, but also keeps it simple, if that makes any sense. How that translates to the field this fall, I guess we have to wait and see. But one of the strengths, and Ryan Day's brought this up a lot this offseason, that of Matt Patricia, and you can go back and look at his time at the Patriots, was catering the defense to the personnel that he had. Like, he doesn't have one scheme that he wants to run. Now, Ohio State will probably keep similar things to what Jim Knowles did last year, just because they're built that way. But I think there will be some interesting tweaks and things that Matt Patricia can do, working with the rest of the coaching staff. And the other coaches, I think, are important here. They promoted Tim Walton to co-offensive coordinator. He was here the entire defensive coordinator, He was here the entire Jim Knowles era. Matt Guerreri, who has worked with Jim Knowles, not only at Ohio State, but also at Duke, became the pass game coordinator on the defensive side. So Matt Patricia has guys around him who have been in this program for a few years now, understand kind of what the Buckeyes want to do. So the collaboration there will be important. Now, how it works without Bill Belichick, I think, is still very much up in the air. I take the Detroit Lions part out of that because obviously he's not a head coach at Ohio State. And I think if you talk to him, he admits that he took a lot of things from New England and tried to instill them in a bad Detroit franchise, and it just didn't work. The time in Philadelphia, it was a bad defense when he took it over towards the end of that season. Not saying that he couldn't have done better. I think he learned a lot from that experience as well. But it will be interesting to see what he's able to do. I think I'm much more comfortable with it now, having gone through spring, having talked to people that worked with him every day, having talked to Matt Patricia. But I still think there are some questions about it, no doubt, when you go to a guy who you can point to one place that he's had a ton of success, but then there's not a lot elsewhere.
So you bring in a coordinator in from the NFL. You also lose a coordinator to the NFL or Ohio State. You've got Chip Kelly, who came in from being UCLA's head coach the year before to being the offensive coordinator and then winning a national championship. Well, he's back. He partnered up with Pete Carroll on the Las Vegas Raiders staff, and this was a promotion. Brian Hartline, a lot of people in Columbus I knew were wondering for a while if this was going to be the end result of him ultimately being the OC for Ohio State. A ton of success as a wide receivers coach, as a recruiter, as a developer. Check the NFL drafts lately. What do you make of Brian Hartline's ascension for this opportunity? And if any, what is the concern that's in place as they have another transition to another offensive coordinator? And oh, by the way, Chip Kelly wasn't their first offensive coordinator hire last offseason, if people remember. Former Penn State head coach Bill O'Brien was initially going to be offensive play caller. So what do we make of this move, sticking with someone on the staff?
Well, it's interesting because originally Brian Hartline was promoted to offensive coordinator in the 2023 offseason. And then Ryan Day decided to keep play calling duties, even though they toyed with Hartline doing some of that in the offseason. So he got some experience that year, but not all of it with the play calling on game day. Then you mentioned they bring in Bill O'Brien, they bring Chip Kelly, and Hartline, I don't want to say demoted to co-offensive coordinator, but clearly Ryan Day wasn't ready to hand the keys of the offense completely over to Brian Hartline. So the question this offseason is, why now? And I recently wrote about this from something I asked Ryan Day, and I'll read you the quote that he said when I asked him what's different, why now, why is he confident? He said, I think the first thing is his work ethic. He's worked his tail off. When you evaluate coaches, you've got to work. You've got to be one of the first guys in the building. You've got to be one of the last guys to leave. You've got to grind on it. The quote goes on. If you want to read it, there's a story on our site about it. But you get the gist there. The Hartline has earned this by working his way up. And, he did that as a GA working under Zach Smith as the wide receivers coach, became the wide receivers coach sort of by default when the Zach Smith situation happened several years ago, proved that he could handle that in his season as sort of an interim wide receivers coach. You mentioned the success he's had in that role. And then in these last 2 years, he's been able to expand beyond just coaching the wide receivers. He talked about learning other parts of the game in a more detailed manner. So I think you see all that play out and you're like, okay, this guy deserves an opportunity. Whether it's at Ohio State or not was kind of the question a lot of Buckeye fans were asking. Is he going to get that opportunity here, or is somebody going to come in, swoop him up, and maybe you bring him back in several years, or maybe he goes on and has success elsewhere? I think Ryan Day, though he's not said this, probably was aware of the fact that Brian Hartline has taken interviews at other programs in previous off seasons. I don't think it's a guy you want to lose, but he will have to prove it this season, calling plays. It's something he's never done before. I think everybody has to do it for the first time, right? Now, not everybody does it for the first time at Ohio State, coming off a national championship, replacing Chip Kelly. But he has had good mentors, Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, Kevin Wilson, briefly Bill O'Brien, as you mentioned. So I think it's kind of the right time to give this a shot if you're Ohio State and you don't want to lose a guy like Brian Hartline. And I'm not saying Brian Hartline would have left. He seems very happy to be at his alma mater and coaching in the roles that he had. But I think it will challenge this group. Now, they did bring in Tyler Bowen, who was the offensive coordinator at Virginia Tech the last few years.
We know him well.
Coach. Yes, right.
Former tight ends coach here at Penn State, former GA here at Penn State, a guy that we like dealing with a lot. So I'm sure you will too.
Yes, you told me that he's very tall, and you were correct when we first met him. I brought that up to him. But that is a guy who I think Brian Hartline can lean on a little bit, given his play calling experience. Obviously, Ryan Day is still in the building. I think based on how things went in spring, they were happy with the play calling. And another thing Ryan Day pointed out is just because you are or you aren't the primary play caller, there's a lot of guys on those headsets, right? So A, Brian Hartline won't be doing this alone. And B, Brian Hartline has already helped contribute even on game day to some of the things Ryan Day talked about, like in between series, he'd be on there talking about, hey, these are the things we need to get done, helping Chip Kelly to kind of keep track of, okay, what's coming up next, kind of situations, things like that. So while he is inexperienced in terms of actually being the one calling the plays, he does have a lot of experience kind of watching, learning, and contributing in other ways.
Hartline will be calling those plays for a new starting quarterback. Will Howard is now a Pittsburgh Steelers rookie. He was a one-and-done situation for Ohio State coming in as a transfer. Obviously, it worked out for both parties. What do we need to know about the quarterback competition as it came out of spring ball?
The assumption going in was that Julian Sayin would win this job. And I think coming out, that's still probably the case. But Lincoln Kienholz, I think, had a better spring than people outside the program probably expected. If you watched the Cotton Bowl 2 years ago when Ohio State played Missouri, first of all, I'm sorry, because that was one of the worst offensive games of football I've ever seen. But Lincoln Kienholz kind of got thrown into the fire there when Devin Brown gets hurt early on. Ohio State had moved things around on the offensive line. And I think that was a lot of people's lasting image of Lincoln Kienholz. But he's a guy who was a multi-sport athlete in high school, came in, was able to focus on football. And this spring, you really saw, if you were around the program, really saw the improvements that he's made. And I think he's really pushed Julian Sayin. Now, if I am a betting man and I'm betting on this, I'm still saying that week 1, when Ohio State hosts Texas, that Julian Sayin is the starting quarterback. But I think it's a lot closer than people expected. When we were out there, we got to watch 2 days where they scrimmaged outside of the spring game. And both of those days, Lincoln Kienholz looked the better quarterback. Now, in the spring game, lights on, fans in the crowd, Julian Sayin was the best quarterback of the group. So, I think you've got to kind of evaluate these things, which is the the job that Ryan Day and Brian Hartline and quarterbacks coach Billy Fessler have to do all offseason and kind of make your best judgment. And obviously, these guys still have time to improve and make their case during fall camp. You also have Tavian St. Clair, the 5-star freshman. I would not really put him in the conversation to start this year, but certainly a guy who I think in spring showed he can do some things. He needs time in the program, no doubt about it. But as Ryan Day said towards the end of spring ball, it's more of a 2-horse race. And I think we won't know probably till middle of fall camp. That's typically been when Ryan Day has made the announcement. But like I said, I think it will be Julian Sayin. But I do think Lincoln Kienholz has made this a more competitive competition than some expected.
Sayin started his career out with Saban at Alabama. Yes. Then Saban leaves Alabama. Then he ends up at Ohio State very quickly. That all happened within a couple months. Yeah. And now in his second year at Ohio State. Patrick, I mentioned Will Howard leaving. Ohio State lost 14 draft picks. That tied a school record, that tied their own Big Ten record for most draft picks. It's the second highest draft pick total of all time. I'm not saying that to bother our listeners out there for Penn State. I'm saying that to note that there's a significant exodus of talent from that roster that just won a championship. So who is the player that you anticipate will be the most difficult for Ohio State to adequately replace as they try to repeat?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some easy ones to point to. Will Howard, obviously, he set the Ohio State single-season completion record. Emeka Egbuka set the all-time receptions record at Ohio State. Those are pretty big, right? But I think there's an underrated guy that I've talked about a lot this offseason, and that's Jordan Hancock, who played the nickel spot, but he also dropped into safety roles, allowing Caleb Downs to be closer to the line of scrimmage, Lathan Ransom to be closer to the line of scrimmage. For me, I don't know if there is that guy who has proven he can step in and do all of the things that Jordan Hancock did. They have guys that can play nickel in terms of just covering slot, covering tight ends, things like that. But Jordan Hancock did so much more. To me, that's a really underrated guy. Lathan Ransom, I mentioned, he's another one at safety. Ohio State doesn't have a ton of safety depth, so that's another position. Now, the fortunate part for both of those guys is they're going to play alongside Caleb Downs, who obviously returns from his junior year, another Alabama transfer after Nick Saban retires. So that does help alleviate things. But I think if you look at most of the positions that Ohio State has to replace, there's a guy you can point to and say, okay, Julian Sayin's probably going to step in for Will Howard. Brandon Inniss can step in for Emeka Egbuka. That's kind of been the succession plan. Even on the offensive line, they've sort of figured some things out. That was a question going into spring. Defensive line is certainly a question in terms, especially interior depth, but I think the starters are probably more or less figured out. You've got your linebacker to replace Cody Simon, cornerback, those type of things. So will it be the same? No, but I think there's replacements in a lot of those positions. But that safety spot and the nickel spot that did a lot, like I said, with Jordan Hancock, will be interesting. Now, those positions may look different under Matt Patricia, as we were saying earlier. The way he caters his defense to the personnel, they may not ask a nickel to do some of the things that Jordan Hancock was asked to, because whoever wins that job may not be equipped to, especially early on, do some of those things. And maybe they figure out other ways to do that where they don't lose as much. But I do think Jordan Hancock, he's a guy who I said going into the NFL draft, whoever takes him is getting a steal. He went to the Buffalo Bills in the 5th round. I have a good friend who's a Buffalo Bills fan, and I made the mistake of telling him he got the steal of the draft, and I haven't stopped hearing about it yet. So we'll see how they fix it, or how they replace a guy like Jordan Hancock. But for me, he's a guy that's not being talked about enough. And I think there's a chance, at least, that Ohio State's defense will feel the loss of him as much as anybody next year.
Interesting. So I'm keeping a close eye on the Buckeyes pass defense. Meanwhile, here in State College, we're keeping close eye on the pass attack and that progression. We'll see if those things marry a little bit on November 1st at Ohio. I do want to get to this one more question with you on the current roster. Conversely, talking about all these guys who are gone, who is somebody this spring that maybe we don't know about yet here in Happy Valley? Maybe nationally they're not a name out there, but they had star potential buzz brewing at the end of spring camp.
The one guy I would say that really kind of popped during spring was wide receiver Quincy Porter, the freshman from New Jersey. Now, Ohio State's receiving room.
Patrick, hold on.
Deep.
We just talked about Porter. We on the preceding segment. This is great timing. We just talked about Porter matching up against the freshman cornerback Jameer Johnson, who's joining Penn State, and how it was a pretty epic battle. Johnson held himself well on the New Jersey high school football field. So nice little segue for you to bring him up now. And I know he's a guy that Penn State was really trying to push for a flip, but ultimately he ended up signing with Ohio State.
Yeah, and we saw why during spring. I mean, he was, like I mentioned, we got to watch some of their scrimmages. He was very, very active. Now he's working with the third team offense, as I mentioned. Ohio State, you know this, Ohio State's wide receiver room, very deep. You've got Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith coming back on the outside. They've got some other guys that have a bit more experience than Quincy Porter, but he was certainly a guy that not only popped to us watching, but he got talked about a lot by teammates, got talked a lot about by coaches, had a pretty good spring game. I don't know if that's a guy who's going to make an immediate impact, just given the depth at the position, as I mentioned, but I do think that's a guy to keep an eye on for the future. I touched on the defensive line depth. Now, Ohio State has added defensive end Bo Atkinson from North Carolina since spring ended, but Zion Grady, another freshman, was a guy who we thought maybe could at least get into the rotation at defensive end. That may not be the case, but I think he was a guy who popped a little bit. And then if we're talking about guys that are going to play next year, James Peoples, he'll be a sophomore running back out of Texas. He was a guy who was the third back a year ago behind Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Actually, in the first game of the season against Akron, he got in the third quarter with the first team offense, scored a touchdown on his first play. A number of guys have made the comparison to J.K. Dobbins when talking about James Peoples, which is a big expectation. He's the only Ohio State running back to go for over 2,000 yards in a season. So it's tough to put those kind of expectations on a kid who hasn't done it yet. But I know that's a guy that Ohio State really likes. In addition to C.J. Donaldson, the West Virginia transfer, who I imagine will share the load with James Peoples. So those are the guys that I would probably say. Again, I think a lot of the guys that are going to step in have played some, so it's not like you're filling holes with completely inexperienced guys. You know, Jermaine Matthews, who started 2 years ago against Penn State at cornerback when Denzel Burke was hurt, is going to step in at corner. Arvell Reese at linebacker, he played a decent amount last season as kind of that third linebacker. So, those are guys that I think people may have heard of already. So I want to give you some names that maybe they don't have a huge role this year, but guys that did pop during spring.
I want to close with this question for you, Patrick, and I think it's probably the one that our listeners and viewers are most curious about. What is the current perception of Penn State in Columbus? I know that the Buckeyes and their fans are enjoying the afterglow of a national championship, and that is what it is. But I know on the peripheral, they've had to take a notice of the all-in approach that Penn State has taken this offseason. This feels like the offseason that James Franklin has waited for a long time. Usually in the offseason, he's comparing himself to Ohio State and resources and kind of lamenting that they're not quite there. That has not been the conversation. It's been, we're hiring this big-time talent. We're going to put the NIL dollars on the table for this big-time transfer player. So how has that all been met in Columbus?
I think there's a recognition of what Penn State's doing. And, it kind of follows in the mold of what Michigan did 2 years ago, what Ohio State did last year with the number of guys coming back, some of the additions that they made. And I think while there is maybe still some skepticism among Ohio State fans of, can James Franklin get over the hump? Can he beat Ohio State to kind of cement Penn State as, a top 2, top 3 team, the top of the Big Ten? I think there is the recognition that this is going to be as talented of a Penn State team as Ohio State has faced in the James Franklin era. And this is a team that probably is going to go into the season ranked in the top 2 or 3 in the country for all of the reasons you just mentioned. So certainly respect, but I think until you do it, and obviously James Franklin does have the one win against Ohio State, but we know how most of those games have gone. I think that most Buckeye fans are like, you got to prove it first. And obviously that game being in Columbus certainly will have an impact as well. We'll see what time that game is, because that's a big topic of conversation among Ohio State fans right now. But I do think there's a level of respect for sure for what's going on in State College.
It's been 9 years since Penn State pulled off an upset with a blocked field goal, return for a touchdown, and catapulted them towards an unexpected Big Ten championship in 2016. 8 consecutive losses to the Buckeyes since then, each of them seemingly a little bit more stinging over the years, and we'll see if that can change. November 1st, again, Penn State's going to have a chance to accomplish a lot in the first couple months of the season, including a home game against the reigning Big Ten champs, Oregon Ducks. But a lot of people that listen to this show, watch this show, and cover the team are not going to be ready to judge this 2025 version of the Penn State Nittany Lions until they get through that game in Columbus. Patrick Murphy, always appreciate the perspective from you and everything Ohio State. I hope if people feel like venturing over to the Ohio State reporting world, they go to bucknuts.com to do that, because that's where you find Patrick and his colleagues' work. Talk to you real soon. And certainly game week, late October, you'll be back on this podcast. I'll be back on yours. And in the meantime, try to enjoy a bit of this offseason.
Yeah, we'll try. It just feels like it never stops, as I know is the case for you guys too. So thanks for having me on, Tyler. I always enjoy this.
Great stuff from Patrick Murphy. Before him, we had Tyler Calvaruso, who always gets the job done on Penn State recruiting. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue. Thanks as always for listening to the Lions 24/7 podcast. Check out our camp coverage from the Elite 11 event in State College on Sunday, and we'll get back to you with a couple more episodes next week.